The NFL world did not just react this week, it recalibrated. A leaked NFLPA scorecard reportedly stamped Kevin Stefanski as the lowest-graded head coach of 2025, and that single document did more than bruise an ego. It put the Atlanta Falcons under a microscope that will not move until results demand otherwise. Right in the center of that spotlight stands Arthur Blank, a respected owner who has built a reputation on stability, patience, and calculated decision-making. But even the most patient leaders feel pressure when the narrative starts turning against them in the most public way possible. This was not a minor critique buried in a press release. This was not a vague needs improvement headline that gets forgotten by Monday morning. A C- grade was attached to a coach who was supposed to signal a new era in Atlanta, and that grade came from the players themselves, the people in the locker room who see everything. And that is precisely where the tension begins, because when ownership makes a bold move, it has to look bold in the right direction. If the results suggest regression instead of elevation, the conversation shifts from optimism to accountability at a speed that no front office can fully prepare for. The NFLPA scorecard was not an anonymous blog post, it was a structured, organized evaluation from the very workforce that Stefanski is responsible for leading, developing, and preparing every single week of the season. When a document like that reaches the public, it does not just start a conversation. It accelerates one that had already been building quietly behind closed doors, in film rooms, and on practice fields across the league. Arthur Blank did not hire Kevin Stefanski to coast through mediocrity. He hired him because he genuinely believed, that Stefanski represented an upgrade, a fresh perspective, and a new ceiling for a franchise that has been searching for stability at the head coaching position for years. But belief and results are two entirely different currencies in the NFL, and right now, those two currencies are not exchanging at a favorable rate for the Falcons organization. Let's talk about math. Because in the NFL, math does not care about reputation, history, or what a coach accomplished 5 years ago in a different city with a different roster. During his final stretch in Cleveland, Kevin Stefanski reportedly finished with 8 wins in 34 games. That is a 23.5% win rate, less than 1 in 4. In a league built entirely on adaptation, weekly adjustments, and the ability to respond to adversity, that number is not just low. It is alarming, and it raises serious structural questions about fit, philosophy, and what exactly Atlanta is getting in return for this gamble. Now compare that directly to the coach the Falcons moved on from, Raheem Morris. Over a similar sample size, Morris posted 16 wins in 34 games, roughly 47%. That is nearly double the production. This is not 44% versus 41%. This is not a coin flip debate where reasonable people can land on either side. This is a wide, documented statistical gap that demands explanation, not deflection. So when you let go of a coach producing competitive results and replace him with someone coming off a 23.5% win run, the burden of proof shifts immediately and entirely onto the organization that made that decision. The question becomes direct and uncomfortable: where is the upside? What is the specific, concrete reason to believe that the trajectory improves under this new arrangement? These are not unfair questions. They are the exact questions that front offices, fan bases, and players themselves ask when the numbers do not tell a reassuring story. And what makes this situation particularly difficult for Arthur Blank is that the comparison is not hypothetical. Raheem Morris is a real coach, with a real record, who was coaching the Atlanta Falcons with the same roster, in the same city, against the same conference competition. The baseline exists. The measuring stick is already planted in the ground, and right now, the gap between where that stick stands and where Stefanski's numbers land is impossible to ignore. The Atlanta Falcons are not rebuilding from scratch, and that context matters enormously when evaluating the decision to change head coaches. This is not a franchise scraping the bottom of the barrel for talent or trying to piece together a competitive roster from nothing. The Falcons are built around youth and genuine potential that analysts across the league have acknowledged openly. At quarterback, Michael Penix Jr. represents hope and a significant long-term investment from the organization. On the outside, Drake London brings size and explosiveness that most teams in the league would build an offense around without hesitation. In the backfield, Bijan Robinson is one of the most dynamic young runners in professional football, a player with the kind of versatility that offensive coordinators design entire systems to maximize. That is not an empty cupboard. That is a foundation. But foundations only matter if the right development follows, because talent without direction is just potential without destination. Young players do not simply need playbooks dropped in front of them. They need belief. They need consistent leadership that shows up the same way on Wednesday as it does on Sunday. They need a head coach who can align scheme with identity and make the players feel that the system was built for them, not the other way around. And here is the reality that no amount of optimism can change. Young quarterbacks, specifically, require patience, trust, and an environment where mistakes are treated as learning opportunities rather than evidence of limitations. Development is fragile. Confidence is fragile. Culture is fragile. If there is any perception of disconnect at the top of an organization, it spreads through a locker room faster than any play call ever could. Michael Penix Jr. is at a critical stage of his development. The decisions made around him in the next 12 months, the offensive system he runs, the coaching voice he hears daily, the culture he operates inside, will shape his trajectory in ways that cannot be easily reversed. That responsibility sits squarely on the shoulders of the head coach, and right now, the head coach sitting in that chair is carrying a C- grade and a 23.5% win rate as his most recent professional credentials. Before the scorecard even leaked, a significant voice had already stepped into this conversation. That voice belonged to Cam Newton. When Newton questioned the fit between Stefanski's leadership style and young quarterback development, specifically referencing how Shedeur Sanders was handled during the pre-draft and early coaching evaluation process, it was not random commentary filling airtime. Cam Newton is not just a former player. He is a former MVP. A Super Bowl quarterback. Someone who lived inside the pressure of being a young quarterback under scrutiny and understands, with first-hand knowledge, exactly how fragile that development window is and how much the coaching environment shapes what happens inside it. His argument was not emotional. It was structural. Newton suggested that development at the quarterback position is about connection, about a coach understanding identity, embracing personality, and creating an environment where a young player's strengths are amplified rather than managed down. When the NFLPA scorecard later placed Stefanski at the bottom of the league rankings among all active head coaches, those earlier concerns from Newton resurfaced with significantly more weight behind them. Because patterns matter in the NFL. A single data point is a moment. Multiple data points from multiple independent sources, a former MVP, an NFLPA player evaluation, a documented win percentage, start forming a pattern that front offices cannot simply dismiss as noise or outside interference. The timing of Newton's comments, combined with the arrival of the scorecard, created a compounding narrative effect that put Atlanta's decision-making under sustained scrutiny rather than the brief, manageable spotlight that organizations can typically wait out. This was not one bad week of coverage. This was a sequence of credible voices and documented evidence all pointing in the same direction at the same time. The Atlanta Falcons are not operating in a neutral market environment. They play in one of the most culturally influential cities in the entire country, and that context adds a layer to this story that purely statistical analysis does not fully capture. Atlanta carries identity, pride, community connection that runs deeper than a franchise record or a divisional standing. Football in Atlanta is personal, and the city's relationship with the Falcons is built on emotional investment that does not turn off when the season ends. When you hire a head coach in Atlanta, you are not simply placing someone at the front of a depth chart meeting. You are placing someone at the center of a cultural ecosystem that is watching, evaluating, and responding in real time. Fit matters in that context. Leadership style matters. Emotional intelligence matters. The ability to connect with a diverse, passionate, and knowledgeable fan base matters in ways that a box score statistic cannot measure but that every person inside the organization absolutely feels. When there are already documented public concerns about connection, development, and leadership style, those conversations do not stay contained to television panels and podcast discussions. They become part of the daily conversation in a city that takes its football seriously and remembers every decision that shaped the franchise's direction. Arthur Blank understands this better than most owners in the league, which is precisely why the current situation carries the weight that it does. He did not move on from Raheem Morris because he wanted average outcomes. He moved on because he believed there was a higher ceiling available to this franchise. But right now, that ceiling feels unclear, unmeasured, and unsupported by the evidence that currently exists in the public record. When the media lines up the comparisons, 47% versus 23.5%, B+ versus C-, the optics are difficult to reframe with optimism alone. And what makes the situation sharper is that this is not rumor or anonymous speculation. It is documented evaluation from the players. It is measurable production from the coaching record. In the NFL, perception often becomes reality, and when players, analysts, and fans are all looking at the same numbers and drawing the same conclusions independently, ownership must respond with either visible results or deliberate reassessment. Silence is not a strategy when the evidence is already in the room. This is where Atlanta stands today, at a crossroads where the path forward requires one thing above all others: results. If Stefanski flips the script, wins games, develops Penix, and energizes the locker room with a culture that players trust and respond to, the noise fades quickly. Winning solves everything in professional football, and a strong season would reframe every comparison and silence every scorecard conversation. But if early struggles mirror the patterns from Cleveland, the scrutiny does not simply intensify, it compounds. Because it would no longer be about a difficult transition period or a new system taking time to install. It would be about repeat behavior, documented across two different franchises, with the same result appearing at the end of the same process. That is why the pressure is building in Atlanta, not dramatically, not emotionally, but logically, steadily, and with the kind of structural credibility that does not respond to press conference optimism. The Falcons have potential. The roster confirms it. The fan base believes it. Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Michael Penix Jr. represent the kind of young core that championship windows are built around when the right leadership is in place to develop it correctly. But belief must meet results on a scoreboard, and right now, the scoreboard conversation has not started yet. When it does, the margin for uncertainty will narrow significantly. What does Arthur Blank do if the trajectory does not improve? Does he double down on the hire and absorb the criticism while the system develops? Does he demand internal adjustments to scheme, staff, or communication? Does he reassess whether the leadership in place is genuinely aligned with the roster he has built and the city he operates in? These are franchise-shaping decisions that do not have clean, comfortable answers. Young talent does not wait forever for organizational clarity. Windows close in the NFL with remarkable speed, and the Falcons cannot afford to spend 2 or 3 seasons discovering whether a coaching hire was the right one when the evidence available right now is already raising serious questions. The grade is official. The 23.5% win rate is documented. The NFLPA player evaluation placed Kevin Stefanski last among active head coaches in 2025. The cultural questions are circulating in one of the most engaged football markets in the country. The comparison to Raheem Morris is direct, measurable, and unavoidable. None of this means the story is finished. Seasons pivot. Narratives change. Coaches who faced early skepticism have produced championships, and the NFL has seen enough plot twists to resist absolute predictions. But hope is not a strategy. Results are. And until those results clearly and consistently support the decision that Arthur Blank made, the spotlight remains on Atlanta, and every number on that NFLPA scorecard stays in the conversation. If you want to stay ahead of every Falcons development, every NFL coaching story, and every update involving Shedeur Sanders and the league's biggest storylines, make sure you like this video right now and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a breakdown. We cover the stories that matter with the facts that the analysis requires every single week. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay locked in because this Atlanta story is far from over.